bringing Marines from 29 Palms to LA. How do you feel about that? Are we afraid? Are we tired? Are we gonna stop fighting? Are we gonna stop resisting these brutal ICE raids?
Good morning, friends. It's Stuart Ryan and the Ryan Report once again. And I wanted to follow up on what's happening in Los Angeles with the ICE raids, the protests, and now the use of military force, much against the law, used by the Trump regime in order to justify the extraordinary misuse of the law, allowing military into the streets of our country. The tragedy taking place in LA is not merely happening in LA, but it stretches across the length and the breadth of our formerly democratic land and has universal consequences. Face it, because we are now officially living in a totalitarian state. And I want to play the clip.
That breaking news is in Los Angeles, where people continue to protest for a third straight day. This is in response to a series of ICE raids in the city, and now also in opposition to the National Guard being called up to stop the protests. This video shows agents firing pellets at a crowd trying to push them back. The protests have been peaceful so far, but now, as you can see, protesters are being met with the National Guard as well as local law enforcement.
The Trump Nazis deliberately targeted LA with massive ICE operations in order to create protests that we see in the streets and then use that as a reason for military intervention. If the U.S. government, the fascist Trump regime, can trial balloon overcoming posse comitatus, the law that protects us and prohibits the use of the military against civilians by invoking either of these two sets of laws that I'm going to discuss, well, he doesn't need the Insurrection Act to send in National Guard troops to LA in light of the protests against the ICE actions, and then the rest of America can suffer the same fate on other issues where or whenever protest and free assembly are at stake. This particular illegal action represents a breakdown in the vital prohibition against the use of military intervention and force against our civilian population. Early yesterday, or the day before yesterday, I posed the question to Governor Newsom, and by the evening, he responded not to me, but to the White House in a letter requesting the removal of the troops, as he is the sole arbiter of their usage, and the law supports his conclusion that it is the governor's prerogative, difficult to say, whether or not to use such troops.
As we continue to follow the very latest information as it relates to those Los Angeles protests, take a look at your screen. The Associated Press reporting that California officials sued President Donald Trump to roll back the administration's National Guard deployment, saying the president trampled over the state's sovereignty. We do know that one of those officials is none other than Gavin Newsom. I want to transition and show you the latest.
Of course, the letter would not be enough. And Governor Newsom then immediately filed a complaint in federal court seeking a TRO or an injunction or a stay to arrest the U.S. government's incursion into his state sovereignty, removing all troops from California's streets until the matter can be fully adjudicated. And now, a word about the dictator Trump's regime's justification, or rather its rationalization, for employing troops in the streets. The predicate is based on the three prongs of two distinct federal laws. Let's look at them. The first law that we want to look at is his invocation of 10 U.S. Code Section 12406, titled National Guard in Federal Service. And you have to bear with me. I really need you to be informed about this, where it says, whenever, one, the United States or any of the commonwealths or possessions is invaded or is in danger of invasion by a foreign nation, they can be employed. Two, there is a rebellion or a danger of rebellion against the authority of the government of the United States. Or three, the president is unable with the regular forces to execute the laws of the United States. Then the president may call into federal service, and I'm reading now, members and units of the National Guard of any state in such numbers as he considers necessary to repel the invasion, suppress the rebellion, or execute those laws. Orders for these purposes shall be issued through the governors of the states, or, in the case of the District of Columbia, through the commanding general of the National Guard. So let's discuss. First, it requires an invasion by a foreign nation. Where is that happening? Which is clearly not the case. A simple example of it being correct being the German invasion of Poland in 1939, an invasion of a foreign nation. Second, it requires a rebellion or a threat of rebellion against the United States government, and an example of this being the events of January 6th, in which there was a rebellion and or an insurrection. Here it does not exist. Third, it requires the president in some prevented form from executing the laws of the United States, which is also not the case here, as arrests of immigrants were carried out by ICE and local police, despite all of the protests in the streets. And fourth, not exactly a prong, but a condition, it requires that the orders for these purposes shall be issued through the governors of the states, not by direct order of the president. The second law that can be used as a pretext for the employment of federal troops comes from Section 502 F2A, providing that this training, which is what this is about, the employment of training and other duties for federal troops, may include supportive operations or missions undertaken by the members' unit at the request of the President or the Secretary of Defense. The word request in Section 502 F2A is significant. The President or the Secretary of Defense may ask a governor to deploy National Guard troops, but the governor is under no obligation to acquiesce. This reading is supported by 32 U.S.C. Section 328, which makes it clear that a governor is the party empowered to order National Guard troops to duty under either prong of Section 502F. So, unlike the Insurrection Act, which they haven't used thus far, and which is next on the cards, these two laws do not overcome posse comitatus, preventing the use of the military against our citizens, and are nothing more than a serious government overreach and abrogation of our constitutional rights of free assembly and free speech to protest in the face of conceived governmental tyranny. Now, a final word about the utilization of malicious catchphrases and wild, extraordinary accusations and declarations made by the Trump regime, not just in this case, but in many others, to justify their draconian, unlawful actions and improper implementation of laws such as the above described, and the Alien Enemies Act, which has also been used in the deportation and imprisonment cases. While most pundits fail to discuss this element, this linguistic tactic, if taken in the context of a legal action in a criminal complaint or other, is nothing more than a conclusory allegation that is in fact deplored by our courts and judges. So, what are these conclusory allegations, which is a term of art, I suppose, in law? Well, conclusory allegations are claims or assertions made in legal documents that lack specific factual details to support them. These allegations are insufficient to meet the requirements of a valid legal claim. But Trump has used them over and over again, making outrageous claims that are part of the construction of the acts which he wishes to effectuate. An example of which might be their claim. MS-13 is an international terrorist organization working on behalf of the Venezuelan government, and that's one example of a claim without evidence. Another, the LA protesters are invaders or causing a rebellion or preventing the government from executing the law, and that would be another. So, the conclusion to all of this is trouble, nothing but trouble. Governor Newsom has done the right thing. He's gone running into federal court to challenge this epic misuse of federal law, implicating one of our most foundational principles that you cannot use the military against our civilian population except in the most extraordinary of circumstances. And from the breaking news, he's doing exactly that, challenging. Of course, at the end of the day, the issues are ultimately going to come before a clandestine fascist six at the Supreme Court, Nazis in black robes, who we cannot rely on to support the Constitution. But that's all we've got, friends. So it seems to me that totalitarianism is here to stay, and there doesn't seem to be much we can do about it.